I just looked at my notes and I wrote down that as a mental health consumer, we're made addicted to the products, kind of like getting addicted to Coca-Cola. And for some reason, my brain thought of how medications seem to stop working over time. And a person needs a new medication or something. And I'm wondering if there is a mechanism around that related to how a lot of times the paradigm can be helpful at first or takes a while for it to help. Like, oh, meds take 6 months to start working or something. What I'm thinking of, though, is one can temporarily divert one's understanding to the medical authority. So, an example like diabetes or something, one can temporarily divert to the medical paradigm and the treatments are helpful, but the helpful treatments in terms of diabetes are taking its toll on the body elsewhere. So it's going to create another problem, which could then be diverted to another medical treatment and another medical treatment. Or one can use the medical treatment and diverting the responsibility and understanding to the authority of medical health professionals, whether mental health or physical health, or one can use that as buying oneself time to understand and take responsibility. So I feel like the brain wants to understand, and in understanding, it's taking responsibility. But in taking a medication, it's saying, I don't want to understand. It's saying, I can't understand right now. I can't move with this right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, if we work to understand as we can in the background, then eventually we understand enough for ourselves that when these strange things happen, we don't need to divert it to an authoritative way of believing what others say it is. We have a sense of understanding for ourselves what it is, and it's not a particular thing. The understanding arises in the moment, and it has to do with the moment or not. It might have to do with the past, but then one feels, oh, this is from the past. It's not happening now. There's the ecphoric sensation. So, yeah, I'm seeing that. That's sort of what I've been doing for the last 4 years, is working to understand in the background, and it seems like I moved through a crisis that felt like quite a crisis, but I could still move through my life. Whereas in January, I couldn't. It made me bedridden and taking Seroquel. So I understand more. And it's not that I understand more, it's understanding moment to moment builds the brain cells of understanding and being attentive and meeting the challenge of the moment. Understanding for oneself, the gesture of, I can understand this for myself. That's a capacity of the brain. I don't have to look to another to tell me how to understand this. And so it doesn't necessarily matter that we understand it in all the same ways. The point is creating and relying on one's own understanding. And then the brain feels that it can meet the moment adequately because it can meet it and understand it without diverting the understanding to the authority. And part of why that needs to be diverted in the beginning is because our brains have been trained not to understand for ourselves. They've been trained to look to the authority of education or family or whatever to tell us how to understand it. Everyone has ready-made answers. But when our brain understands for itself, it understands that the answer in the moment isn't even the answer. No answer can adequately grasp the moment. So in that way, when there's an answer in the moment, which might be a thought, and one is moving in this way of attempting to understand, one understands that that's not the answer, that that's not the truth. So again, this is another way that the mechanism of believing and thinking and believing thoughts starts to break down, because one understands that a thought is never really completely coherent with the moment. We're usually completely coherent with the moment when we're not thinking. In an emergency situation, all of a sudden we do something so quickly to help someone or something like that, and we don't even know how we did it, because we so met the challenge of the moment without thought. So part of it is learning to meet the moment without the mediation of the past thoughts. And the more we're able to do that, the less thought comes in, or if it does, we understand that that's not the answer. That's not the truth. So in saying that we understand it's not the answer, what we're doing is we're questioning that thought. We're doubting it. We're not believing it. And that creates the space to not act based on thought. And all of a sudden we're perceiving, we're seeing, we're listening to thought, but it's a different approach than identifying with it and believing it. So in that way, some of these scary states with scary thoughts can be a practice of negating them and not believing them. Because if we believe them and act on them, we end up in the psych ward, oftentimes. And if we don't, then it's the same in a way as every other person on the planet who has their own supposed private thoughts and are just moving around in their day, even though they're probably thinking, I wish I could punch that person in the face, but still smiling and nodding like people do. So if somebody thought in regular consciousness, I want to punch that person in the face, and they believe that thought and they punch someone in the face, they would be in trouble. So what's the difference if I think there's aliens landing outside and I don't believe it, versus a person who hasn't been labeled and pathologized thinking, I want to punch this person in the face, and not doing it? It's thought. We don't need to act on our thoughts, and they're not even our thoughts. If we identify it, that creates the me, which is the identifier. So disidentifying is not believing. And yeah, I wonder if I've said that in enough ways to illustrate the point. And that goes along with what I said to myself. First, do no harm. And then when we have some of these terrible thoughts and whatever the heck, a storm of thought, we don't say the weather storm has something to do with us, though in some states of consciousness it might, but by keeping this thought storm impersonal, we're not creating the person that this is about. It's not about a person. It's an impersonal field of thought that we all have access to, and a lot of us are thinking the same thoughts about ourselves, and then we think we're all separate. But what I'm saying is, if we have a thought storm that's horrible and we don't act on it, and we're applying this principle of first do no harm. When you think about psychiatry, they definitely do not work in alignment with the principle of first do no harm. They do a lot of harm. Tons. So if we, as people who go through these thought storms, first do no harm, we are in a way putting our consciousness in a higher vibration than psychiatry. And if we're able to do that, stay with first do no harm, we won't be subject to psychiatry, which doesn't go according to first do no harm. So by utilizing a doctoral oath of sorts that isn't applied to a psychiatry, we don't have to experience psychiatry. And a lot more to talk about, but I gotta go. Talk to you later. One last little snippet about this first do no harm is, even if we don't do harm and we end up psychiatrized, the universe knows that we would do no harm. And the universe will select for this wisdom of not doing harm to others. Even if sometimes we're feeling at some point like we did do harm, we hurt somebody, or we're confused about that. If we don't do harm, the universe knows, and this is part of the thing. The universe is seeing who will do no harm. No matter what thought says, and the universe is trying to create an algorithm in the brain where we're not operating based on thought. So if we have really terrible thoughts and we don't operate based on them, the universe knows we're not going to operate based on thought. So it's very complex, very dynamic, very much an elegant design. So this cycle might feel like a curse, but really it could be transforming us into a blessing.